szél, apád szavát merre vigyék.
Lesznek új esték, hétköznapi csodák.
Fiat, lányod, ha ébred, álmod viszi tovább.
Sok száz győzelem, 1000 év mögöttünk, festettek új képeket, még meg sem születtünk. A nap felkel reggel,
És ha érezzük, szédülünk,
marad 3 szó, semmit rólunk féltünk.
akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk.
Ne félj, soha se félj,
De mindenre figyelj,
akárhová lépsz,
együtt leszünk, ha kell. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk.
együtt leszünk, ha kell, a Jóisten figyel.
Egy nyelvet beszélünk, mire a világ odafigyel. Repítsük sólymok szárnyán a gondolatot. Mi tudjuk, mi volt tegnap, mi látjuk a holnapot. Együtt leszünk, ha kell,
Együtt leszünk,
a Jóisten figyel. Egy nyelvet beszélünk, mire a világ odafigyel. Repítsük sólymok szárnyán a gondolatot. Mi tudjuk, mi volt tegnap, mi látjuk a holnapot. Együtt leszünk, ha kell, a Jóisten figyel. Egy nyelvet beszélünk, mire a világ odafigyel. Repítsük sólymok szárnyán a gondolatot. Mi tudjuk, mi volt tegnap, mi látjuk a holnapot. Semmit
sírt, gyermekeidnek segít a szél. Apád szavát merre vigyék,
Lesznek új esték, hétköznapi csodák.
fiat, lányod, ha ébred, álmod viszi tovább.
Sok száz győzelem, 1000 év mögöttünk. Festettek új képeket, még meg sem születtünk. A nap felkel reggel,
És ha érezzük, szédülünk,
marad 3 szó, semmit rólunk féltünk.
Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk.
Ne félj, soha se félj,
te mindenre figyelj.
akárhová lépsz.
Együtt leszünk, ha kell. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk.
Együtt leszünk, ha kell, a Jóisten figyel.
Egy nyelvet beszélünk,
Mire a világ odafigyel,
Repítsük solymok szárnyán a gondolatot. Mi tudjuk, mi volt tegnap, mi látjuk a holnapot. Együtt leszünk, ha kell,
együtt leszünk,
a Jóisten figyel. Egy nyelvet beszélünk, mire a világ odafigyel. Repítsük solymok szárnyán a gondolatot. Mi tudjuk, mi volt tegnap, mi látjuk a holnapot. Együtt leszünk, ha kell, a Jóisten figyel. Egy nyelvet beszélünk, mire a világ odafigyel. Repítsük solymok szárnyán a gondolatot. Mi tudjuk, mi volt
Kányom, ez ezt nem kell közelhangolni, de szerződni.
Tehát a beszélek, akkor csak nem
Igen.
megy a piros és
Oké.
Ha véletlenül bekapcsolom, már akkor sincsen.
jó, hát itt tudnak csinálni.
Szerintem ezt leveszem innen.
Nem, ez nagyon rossz.
Balog Leventének ne csináljunk ilyen
Ne legyen ott.
Hogy vagy, elnök úr?
Mi?
Hogy vagy?
Köszönöm szépen, változatlan. Ilyen mindig a változatlanul vagyok. Úgy viselkedek ma már, hogy reggel bedugom a karakter a telefonomat, és akkor csak észreveszem, hogy nem merül, tudod.
Aha.
Akkor vagy be tudom még egyszer dugni, vagy azt mondom, hogy elég. De ebben vannak már
Aha, aha.
azon megyek, nem muszáj, nem hívnak, hogy hívják a felvételreformát,
Aha, aha.
mert nem akarok egy olyan húzóra tenni német.
Ja.
Nem a szöveggel meg az aggyal van baj, hanem egész egyszerűen a formálom a szavak.
Ja.
Ezt meg lehet hallani, hogy
Igen. Hát, de úgy gondolom, hogyha főleg ha hosszabb lélegzetvételű, nem a beszélgetés, egy 5-10 percnél is ez
nem
elég.
elég ki, tudás, nem az
Nem?
a probléma, hanem
Ja.
tehát pont
Hát ez
bekerült
hatással
aki igen, nagyon. De már az is, hogy oda bemegyek hozzátok ugye a civil akadémiára, és már valami, nem még izgulok, hanem az ördögben nem.
Igen.
Úgyhogy hát igen, erre oda kell figyelni, de viszont annak örülök nagyon, hogy rendkívül számos
Na, persze.
még mindig, és ez
De jó.
nagyon jó. Részlet ilyenkor már mindennek örülni
Te
kell.
nagyon aktív vagy, tehát hogy a kanappal. Ez is annyira jó anyag, ez a konferencia, a kérdések nagyon aktuálisak mindenki.
Persze, és nyomnunk kell, mert tudom, minden nyelven. Mondjuk azt, hogy alkázunk folyamatosan kis egységben.
Igen.
Most, hogyha ezen az oldalon nincs meg, akkor
A szeretet fénye benned él, ne feledd, mit anyád mesélt. Gyermekeidnek segít a szél, apád szavát merre vigyék.
Lesznek új esték, hétköznapi csodák.
Fiat, lányod, ha ébred, álmod viszi tovább.
Sok száz győzelem, 1000 év mögöttünk. Festettek új képeket, még meg sem születtünk. A nap felkel reggel,
És ha érezzük, szédülünk,
marad 3 szó, semmit rólunk féltünk. Akárhová vetett.
Jó, hogy a...
akkor én is nyomjam meg, nem baj, ugye?
El is beszéltünk, elég ha beszélünk, és akkor meg...
Kezdhetjük?
Igen.
Jó napot kívánok! Sok szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit az Európai Civil Együttműködési Tanács online konferenciáján. Külön köszöntöm azokat a kedves szellemi honvédőket, akik a Zoom alkalmazás segítségével követnek majd bennünket ezen a nagyon témadús és érdekfeszítő konferencián. Ezt ígérjük önöknek. Én Ferkó Dániel vagyok, történész, újságíró, a Hírtelevízió műsorvezetője. Nekem jutott ma az a megtisztelő feladat, hogy önökkel lehetek az idei EUCET konferencián, melynek kapcsán lényeges kérdéseket, témákat fogunk kibeszélni. A mottója, vagy a fő üzenete a mai összejövetelünknek, az pedig nem más, mint civil párbeszéd Európa jövőjéről, energia, mix vagy gazdasági függőség, így szól a kérdés. Mielőtt belevágunk néhány szót az Európai Civil Együttműködési Tanácsról, engedjenek meg, hogy mondjak, ugye kezdetben magyar és lengyel kezdeményezésre alakult meg ez a szervezet, és hát egyébként azóta többszörösen bebizonyosodott az, hogy az egyetlen járható út, hogyha az Európai Unióról gondolkodunk, hogyha a szabad nemzetek uniós szövetségeként tekintünk az Európai Unióra, és a keresztény Európa szemüvegén keresztül vizsgáljuk meg a dolgokat. Egyébként magának a Magyar Civil Összefogás Fórumnak a jelmondata is ehhez kötődik, amit nemzeti nagyságunk Széchenyi István fogalmazott meg aképpen, hogy semmit rólunk nélkülünk. A mai pódium beszélgetésünkre egyébként Budapestről, Franciaországból és Svédországból csatlakoznak majd be előadóink. A konferencia nyelve az angol, és minden előadónak 15-20 perce áll majd rendelkezésre, hogy kifejtse a gondolatait, nézeteit. És már is belekezdünk, ígérem, nem húzom az időt, csak még annyit, hogy fontos megfogalmazni azt az alapállást, ahogyan az EUCET közelít közös dolgainkhoz, európai dolgainkhoz. Ez pedig nem más, mint a keresztény kultúra hagyományai, a személyes szabadság, a nemzetszabadsága, a demokráciához való kötődés és az emberi jogok tisztelete. Ezek konkrétan megfogalmazható közös értékeink, és nagyon fontosnak tartjuk azt, és az alapítók, hogy a nemzetállamok által elfogadott kereszténységből fakadó tettek, cselekedetek azok, amelyek nagyjá tették Európát minden időben, és ez az a keret, ami egyébként Amerikára, ezen belül az Egyesült Államokra és Kanadára is hatott. És itt ül mellettem egyébként az EUCET egyik alapítója, dr. Csizmadia Laszlo, aki egyben a Civil Összefogás Fórum CÖKA elnöke is, és felkérem önt, hogy tartsa meg a köszöntőjét, és egyben az előadását is. Öné a szó, elnök.
Köszönöm szépen a nagyon precíz bevezető, nekem is segítséget ad a mondani valómhoz, és engedjék meg, hogy legelőször is tisztelettel köszöntsem a meghívott vendégeinket, akik egy szívvéli meghívásnak tesznek most eleget, ezt nagyon szépen köszönjük. Tehát itt lesz velünk dr. Henri Malosse úr, aki egyébként az EUCET grémiumának egyik vezető aktivistája és tagja, Erik Almqvist úr, aki szintén aktív tevékenységével segíti az Európai Unió Civil Együttműködési Tanács működését, és nem utolsó sorban Litkai Máté úr, akitől majd a igazi szakmai felvilágosítást és elképzeléseket várjuk a témáknak megfelelően. Én úgy gondolom, hogy most azt kell mondanom, hogy ez az előkészítése a 4. EUCET kongresszusnak, amit valójában ősszel fogunk megrendezni, és sorozatban kívánjuk az online konferenciákat tartani azért is, hogy a magyarországi szellemi honvédők nagyon széles körből, tehát határon túlról, Európa jelentős országaiból és jelentős szereplőitől tudják meg, hogy ők mit gondolnak. Ezzel a kis bevezetővel kezdeném, és rögtön, ahogy szokták mondani nálunk Magyarországon, ugye egy híres ételt mondok, belecsapnék a lecsóba, a közepébe, mert az idő fogy, és értékes mondatokat és a tarisznyákban, hogy úgy mondjam, politikai, gazdasági és társadalmi pogácsákat várunk a civilek részére. Amit nagyon fontosnak ítélek, amikor civilekről beszélünk, akkor nem szabad eltérnünk attól, hogy a népfelség elvét kell tiszteletbe tartani. Na most, hogyha magunk körül is elkezdünk körülnézni, akkor látjuk, hogy azért ez nem minden kormány, sőt adott esetben az Európai Unió sem tartja be, holott a polgári kezdeményezéseknek a lényege éppen az lenne, hogy a népfelség hangja megjelenjen például egy olyan intézményben is, mint az Európai Unió. A polgári kezdeményezéseknél azt látjuk ebben a pillanatban, hogy hiába egy vagy adott esetben 2 millió aláírás, vagy akár 7 országból származó aláírás, sokszor az Európai Bizottságnak a fiókjába kerül, és intézkedéseket viszont nem tapasztaltunk. Ezért a mi alapítványunk arról beszél, és azt írja folyamatosan, amikor kell, és itt az ideje és a jelentősége az Európai Uniónak a petícióiban, hogy valahol kellene változtatni a kezelésén és az érvényben lévő polgári kezdeményezéssel kapcsolatos törvények szempontjából a jog szerinti kezdeményezésre gondolok, és rendeletek változtatására, mert az nem észszerű, hogy most egy fordított piramis működik az Európai Unióban, és az európai bürokraták kénye kedve szerint sokszor úgy járunk, hogy a hangunk nem jut el, oda, ahova el kéne jutni. Ezért van aztán az, hogy adott esetben megtesszük a javaslatainkat. Ilyen közös javaslatnak nyilvánul meg az is, hogy a jövőben nagyon jó lenne, hogyha a polgári kezdeményezések megítélése egy civil bizottság előkészítésében, az Európai Civil Bizottságra gondolok, 27 tagországú összetételével, nem az Európai Bizottsághoz kerülne, hanem egyenesen az Európai Tanácshoz, ahol a miniszterelnökök és államfők tudnának állást foglalni arról, hogy ez a téma érdekes, számukra fontos, mert hiszen ha jól belegondolnak, akkor arról van szó, hogy a országban a hatalmat tovább viseljék, ahhoz nyilván az adott állam többségéhez kell alkalmazkodniuk. Tehát ez az egyik fontos mondanivalóm, amit itt az előszóban szerettem volna mondani, de a másik az egy megint csak fontos dolog, hogy Európában ma a demokrácia értelmezése az nagyon sokszínű lett, holott valójában a demokráciát talán mégiscsak a klasszikus elvek szerint kellene figyelembe venni, arról nem is beszélve, hogy a nyíltan ki
framework. The democracy export of the Democratic Party of the United States causes many problems in the life of Europe. And this export of democracy does not take into consideration the sovereignty of the nations, the principle of subsidiarity, and I think it's an enormous problem, an enormous error. And I think we should somehow wake up the population of Europe before the European Union elections, that it is high time that they cast their votes in a way that the present situation could be changed. So I think we need fresh air in the European institutions. Where is the new election law? If and in case the citizens of Europe will vote along the old electoral rules, this time again, party preferences will prevail. And here, I think it's important to note that the political will and the political strength of the European Parliament is too much at the moment. If we take into consideration the present scandal, we can easily come to the conclusion that MEPs right now hardly represent the interests of the citizens of Europe. Somehow they live in an ivory tower and they lost their grip on the society. And the third thing I would like to mention is energy dependence in Europe. I think all of us agree that this is the direct consequence of the present war between Russia and Ukraine. The European Union somehow forgot about the important rule or law. First, this is a good proverb for tailors. First, measure, and it's only then that you cut the material. So they imposed the sanctions without prior deliberations about the consequences. And here we face a very grave problem. a problem that seemingly cannot be solved by the European Union. Veto, the right to veto, does not mean an adequate protection of a country in the Council. Rather, we would need a consensus-based decision. This is what democracy is about. But there are exceptions, and that's also the rule of democracy. There are smaller states who have, or which have different interests due to their geopolitical situation. So these specific interests should not be ignored and rejected, but rather a certain consensus-based decision should be made. And this is the only way how we can formulate a Europe where the citizens of the continent can feel safe, can maintain their nationality, and they can also maintain or cherish their culture, which sometimes is several thousand-year-old culture. So all this means that from a cultural point of view, a higher level European Union could be established in case the member states could retain their sovereignty. In this case, the federation would become much stronger with the amended legislation and with the involvement of the national parliaments in the decision-making process in the most important areas, finance, military, defense policy, etc. So only these important areas would remain in under the auspices of the European Union. And in this case, we should also think about what a European decree power means if the sovereignty of the nation states are retained. So roughly that was all I wanted to say. And one more thought to be shared with you. I am excitedly awaiting our debate on the energy mix, on the energy questions. Here again, this is an area where there are different interests of the different member states. There are also differences among the different concepts and attitudes vis-à-vis energy. For example, Germany closed their nuclear power plants, but at the same time they are opening many coal mines based on fossil energy. So we are very far from reaching a decision of about the fact that who is right. Green parties are right, but perhaps everybody is right in a certain way, and this is exactly the arena where we should come to a consensus-based deal. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry for speaking so long. It's a great honor for Hungary, for the majority of Hungary, that you have joined our conference. I would like to thank for your activities so far, and I hope that we will also receive your presentations in a written form, which would be excellent for us because we would forward it to the interested parties, translated into different languages. So please be sincere, be frank, share your thoughts with us, share your experiences with us. Thank you very much for your attention. Mr. President, thank you very much for your introductory thoughts. Thank you very much for your presentation. And before starting, okay, so let's speak about something else.
So before we talk about the European coal and nuclear community, we can also agree that in the 1970s, so since the 1970s, there's been a process, probably not a good one, and a lot of people want to know whether this organization, this international organization, the Federation of European States, the European Union,
pedig a tagállamok.
to what extent is this based on sovereignty or the sovereignty of the member states? This is one of the cornerstones of the EU-SET conference. This is what we have to talk about.
Politikai intézet igazgatójának, akitől nyilvánvalóan fogunk hallani a mai konferenciánk témájáról, energiamix vagy gazdasági függőség a háború árnyékában. Litkai úr, önt illeti a szót, parancsoljon.
Thank you very much. I will deliver.
Nagyon szépen köszönöm. Angolul készültem az előadással, és szeretném megköszönni az előadóknak, hogy ezt a rendezvényt megteremtették, és különösen szeretnék köszönetet mondani az elnök úrnak. Amiről én beszélni fogok, az az energiaszektor, az energia ágazat, illetve arról, hogy az energia ágazat különböző megközelítései hogyan változtak idővel. Különösen koncentrálni fogok arra az időpontra, ami az energiaválság eleje óta kialakult. Én a Klímapolitikai Intézet igazgatója vagyok, és az én témám elsősorban a fenntarthatóság. Nagyon sok kutatást végzünk, nagyon sok kutatással foglalkozunk, ami az éghajlatváltozással kapcsolatos, de az energiaválság eleje óta az energiaszektorra is nagyon nagy hangsúlyt helyezünk, hiszen ez a legnagyobb hozzájáruló az üvegházhatású gázok kibocsátásának világszerte. Az energiaszektor, az energiaválság megváltoztatta az energiaszektor hozzáállását, és ezért van az, hogy rekord magas üvegházhatású gáz kibocsátás történt az utóbbi időben. Van egy konszenzus a szakértők között, ami az energiaszektor dilemmáját illeti. Ez pedig azt jelenti, hogy ennek három fő aspektusa van, amelyet a döntéshozónak figyelembe kell venni mindenkor. Az első aspektus az az elérhetőség, mennyire engedhetjük meg magunknak. Ezt a szolgáltatást nyújtani kell, ugye az energiához való hozzáférés mindenki számára, méghozzá úgy, hogy mindenki számára elérhető legyen. Tehát olcsó, elérhető módon kell mindenki számára ezt biztosítanunk. A második aspektus, az pedig az ellátás, hiszen a szolgáltatásnak megbízhatónak kell,
should secure the purchases as well. And the third aspect is the environmental performance. So the energy sector should be more and more sustainable. And it's a really hard challenge for decision makers because actually right now we cannot really balance it equally all the time. And the priority was, before the energy crisis, the number one priority was the environmental performance. So the European Union decided that we should reach carbon neutrality by 2050, and we should do whatever we have to do for reaching this goal. And for example, Germany tried to and actually trying to build its economy on renewable energy sources only, and they have a goal to increase the capacity of renewable energy sources more and more year by year. And most of the member states in the European Union have the same renewable goals. Everybody want to increase the renewable capacities. What is the problem with this? For example, as I mentioned, Germany. So Germany reduced. Sorry, I hear the.
Nyersanyagok, és hát nagy kérdés, hogy a szankciók következtében, amiket az Európai Unió ugye bőszen kivet, és most azt hiszem már a 11. szankciós csomag az, amelyik az Európai Unió készül Oroszországra kivetni. Nos, az látszik, hogy ezzel semmilyen célt nem ér el az Európai Unió, lából lövi magát, miközben a kőolaj és a földgáz ára az egyre csak emelkedik, és egyáltalán nem látszik semmiféle remény arra vonatkozóan, hogy kiváltsuk ezeket. De talán elnök úrhoz fordulok, hogy azon közben, miközben megjön majd a hang, és tudjuk folytatni ezt a konferenciát. Szóval a bevezetőjében említette azt, hogy mélyreható változásokra lenne szükség az Európai Unióban, és ez legfőképpen arra lenne szükség, hogy Európa polgárai sokkal jobban be legyenek vonva a döntéshozatalban. Most mennyire látszik lehetőség arra, vagy mennyire látszik kiút arra, mennyire látszik fogadókészség az Európát jelenleg vezető elittől, hogy ebben valami
establishment that there would be some progress in this respect? Well, probably in my introduction I also touched upon this topic. What we need to say is that there is no reception in this respect. There are some delayed reactions and responses. I could also mention today when we see examples that the Ukrainian agricultural products and the boom of these products, how this is shaping the prices in Europe like half price, but then from France to Slovenia and Poland we can see that agricultural producers are suffering, but at the same time the European Union, just as it happened during the pandemic, tries to respond in a very delayed manner, despite the fact that we are close to harvest. And I think our hope, and of course after harvest, when the warehouses are full with Ukrainian products, we will not be able to process and store our products, which are world class. So what I'm really glad about is that I managed to say these things that I wanted to say, and let me give the floor back to our speaker. Yes, we have incoming sound again, so if Mr. Litkai is here with us, then we can switch him back. Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Sorry for the technical problem. I don't know it's on my side or the other side, but yes, so the environmental performance where I finished my sentence, so it was the #1 priority. And why is it a problem? Because we let go the energy security and the affordability in the last few years. And actually, with the beginning of the energy crisis, it deepened this situation heavily. What I mean by that, I mentioned Germany. Germany use more and more renewable energy sources, but we cannot store the electricity on an industrial level. So we don't have enough battery capacity to store the electricity. So we have to use more and more gas to balance the volatility of the consumption and the volatility of the production. Because of the environmental concerns, we reduced heavily the extraction of natural gas in all over Europe, and parallelly we increased heavily the import amounts of natural gas. So we created a situation when we were very dependent on other energy exporters countries, for example, Russia. And don't forget that Germany not just built the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, but they built the Nord Stream 2 pipeline as well. So they actually planned to double the amount of natural gas what they could transfer from Russia to Germany. So the original plan was that. But with this plan, we created a dependency on other countries, not on just Russia, but on other energy exporters as well. Why?
Importőrök vonatkozásában is miért? Azért, mert az ellátás
during the energy crisis. So we experienced an unprecedented price peak in the last 2 years. But we experienced that with the beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian war, the supply to Europe became questionable and unreliable. And we had to find new routes to get our energy. But actually, we did not succeed in this effort, at least not totally. What I mean by that, the International Energy Agency forecasts an approximately 30 billion cubic meters of gas shortage for 2023. Why? Because Russia was the biggest supplier of natural gas to the EU. They supplied approximately 160 billion cubic meters annually. It was 40% of the annual gas import of the EU. And we could not fill this gap. Russia decreased the supply to the continent, and of course, the EU wanted to cut itself totally from Russia. So these caused a heavy reduction of the amounts of natural gas transport from Russia. And right now the situation is that we are in a negotiation process with Qatar, with Algeria, with Azerbaijan, with Norway, and with the US, but they simply just cannot supply enough for the EU. They cannot supply the same amount what we could get from Russia and other suppliers in the previous years. But with this shift that the priorities changed, and right now the energy security is the number one priority of the EU and of course all the member states, we build new capacities. We try to produce as much energy in our borders as we could. And the other priority is energy efficiency. We try to save as much energy as much we can. And the third one is we try to find alternative sources. Of course, the renewable energy sources could be one source, but we are negotiating, as I mentioned, with different energy exporters. But we have two problems. One is that we need infrastructure. If we want to cut ourselves from Russia, which country can supply the EU through pipelines? We have to build new pipelines or new LNG terminals to accept the amount of LNG, for example, from the US. But these infrastructural developments are relatively slow. So we will need months or even years to build those capacities. And even with the currently existing capacities, for example, the pipeline which connects us, Hungary, with Croatia, there is a bottleneck between the two countries. So we need capacity increasing investments, and actually not on the side of Hungary, but on the side of Croatia. And why it is important? Because Hungary is criticized by many member states and Brussels itself that Hungary did not do enough for diversifying away from Russia. But actually, in my opinion, it's not true. We connected ourselves with all the neighboring countries in the electricity grid and in the gas infrastructure as well in the past 1 decade. So we did this work on the side of Hungary, but actually from all over the countries in the previous years, Russian gas came, even from Austria, even from Slovakia, because the reality was that it was the cheapest route to Europe, and it was the cheapest supplier in the past few years. And right now, we have to do very serious work to find new suppliers and build new infrastructure. And even if we are connected to the neighboring countries, we have to build the exit, for example, to the North Sea or to the Mediterranean Sea. And we have to cooperate with the different transition countries, like, for example, Slovakia or Czechia or Austria. And this is where the EU can help us. If we have a problem, for example, with Croatia, building new infrastructure, the EU could finance or at least help this infrastructural development on the Croatian side to build faster these diversification routes.
Bocsánat,
And,
nem akarok
one
beleszólni,
more-
csak kérem, hogy fogja rövidre.
Mr. Litkai just would like to keep it short.
At the end. Why the energy sector is important, not just to ensure of our economy, but this is also a marker of the shift of power. Changing the suppliers and changing the routes which can supply Europe. With this, we change the reliances and dependencies of the EU. So we should be very cautious through this process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen,
Thank you very much, Mr. Litkai, for these thoughts. And now, before I give the floor over, just following our historical overview, it's important to talk about when we talk about the differences in the federalist or confederalist approaches in the EU, we have to talk about the Lisbon Treaty, when the European Civic Initiative was launched. This is important because this opened the opportunity for European citizens to have a bigger say, in the decision-making processes of the EU. And this, therefore, was supposed to increase and strengthen the democratic nature. But meanwhile, it also turned out that the European Commission would still have the right to decide whether they are going to put a certain issue, a question on the agenda or not. We Hungarians could really feel that when it came to the defense of the indigenous minorities. We just made a collection of signatures when we had the 1 million signatures, despite which the EU Commission just swept this off the table. The question is whether there is a way out from this paradox situation, and I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Erik Almqvist, who is a journalist and used to be member of the Swedish Parliament. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ferko, and also thank you, Csizmadia and CÖF-CÖKA for giving me the opportunity to once again speak in these forums. I'm more of a journalist than an academic, so I will try to be pretty straightforward. In my last speech for the EU set a year and a half ago, I said that we are facing turbulent times ahead. And I ended that speech with a quote. It was a quote from a popular TV series called Game of Thrones. There's a fictional character by the name Lord Baelish, and he once said that chaos is not a pit, chaos is a ladder. I said back then that we need to build ourselves that ladder if we want to come out of these turbulent times as winners. And I think that this is an analogy that can very well be applied on the current situation, also when it comes to independence regarding energy and economics, which is the topics of today. But to start with, I think it's important to understand that you can hardly have independent economic policy without also having political independence. And you can certainly not run independent energy policies unless you also have political independence. And I think here it starts to get a little bit complicated because, like it or not, control over energy trade is not only the epicenter of global geopolitics and international relations, it is also a central component in the current war in Ukraine. And this shouldn't come as a surprise because this has more or less always been the case in wars where superpowers are involved. And even though energy might not have been the prime reason for Russia to invade their neighbor, it is certainly a field which the adversaries of Russia considers a core interest, even in this war. And also, let's go back a little bit in time to get it to context, because don't forget the pretext to this war. 2021 was a year of gas wars in Europe. Russia was pushing up the gas prices to put pressure on Germany and the EU to open the new Nord Stream pipeline to Europe. And the US responded that it will make sure that this will never happen, the pipe will never open. So we had a quite serious diplomatic feud, and Russia was committing military exercises by the border of Ukraine. Russia was, they were threatening that if they don't get certain guarantees, and one of those guarantees would be that Ukraine should be a neutral state from NATO. That was central to what they were demanding. If this didn't happen, Russia would act one way or the other militarily. And of course, this is, it's connected, because if Ukraine would become a NATO country, of course, Russia would also expect Ukraine to synchronize its energy policies with Washington and not with Moscow, as has been the case until now. And remember that Ukraine is the most important transit country for Russia for their gas pipelines, especially before Nord Stream. So while you have both a threat to disable Nord Stream and a threat to cut off Ukraine from Russia's energy infrastructure, it's quite easy to see how the perceived threat from the Russian perspective also very much considered energy. And here we are. And then when Russia finally invaded Ukraine, the US made very clear that it will make sure that the Nord Stream pipes from now on will not only not be open, the new pipelines, but they will completely cease to exist. And then a few months later, they were also bombed. Also see the pattern that since the beginning of the war, the gas trade has shifted very much in Europe. More and more, it has shifted to American LNG gas, liquefied gas coming by big ships. I think it has more than tripled by now since the war started. And Europe is quickly expanding with new LNG terminals to be able to receive more, to increase the capacity. And of course, also the gas is now more and more traded in US dollars. That was already common, but now the US dollar is really dominating in difference to euro, for example. So what does all this mean for Europe in the situation we are now? Of course, destroying and disabling central energy infrastructure in Central Europe makes Europe more vulnerable and also less independent. And this is where we are now. So how can we get less vulnerable in the future, considering the situation? Of course, we need to diversify, as already been said in this conference. And right now we have, for example, new pipes in Azerbaijan and Norway connecting Europe for alternative gas routes. Mentioned the LNG gas, and That's obviously one field where we are now rapidly expanding, but to be honest, I don't think this is a good long-term solution, because LNG gas is just gas, but in difference to pipe gas, it's slower, it's more complicated, and it's much more expensive. So this is not really, a feasible way to improve our energy system and dependence compared to the past if we're looking further ahead. I think in short and midterm, we need first and foremost to focus on new sources of energy and try to get less reliable on gas. And then we also have to look at what possibilities we have when it comes to domestic production. Obviously, the EU cannot produce that much gas since we don't have that big gas fields, at least not known. So we have to look at domestic alternatives. And this is especially true for Eastern and Central Europe, because the countries in Eastern and Central Europe consume much more energy than which is produced. And this applies to both electricity and gas and oil. And again, there is a natural limit to how much gas and oil you can produce domestically. So we have to look at electricity. And what does it mean to look at electricity? Specifically, I would say the obvious thing to do is to have a nuclear revival. And you can already sense that this is happening over parts of Europe, at least. We need to rapidly build new nuclear reactors, and we have to certainly stop closing the existing ones down, like it's still happening in countries run by Greta Thunberg, like Germany or Sweden. And then also, if you look at Central and Southern Europe, solar panels are very good complementary to nuclear power, since many times peak energy usage is in the summer and not in the winter, as is in the northern part of Europe. And the solar panels obviously also makes it attractive to build new modern battery packs. This is just about to get there economically to become a feasible investment because of the prices of these lithium cells going down. And of course, if we're looking more long term, we should get back to a more functional relationship with Russia. Europe has always and will always be the strongest when European countries can get along, of course. And this is especially true when it comes to the biggest country in Europe with the largest population, the largest army, and by far the most natural resources. The most natural resource in the world, even. Of course, this is not realistic to think that we could regain a good relationship to Russia today. This is far away because of the invasion of Ukraine, but it still remains an important strategic long-term goal. And to safeguard our energy system and trade long-term, we also need to have a more sovereign security policy for Europe and foreign policy. And this always starts with military capabilities. If Europe would have had military capabilities and a sovereign security policy from the beginning, the war in Ukraine wouldn't have had to happen. I'm not trying to remove any blame from Moscow, because they are 100% responsible for the invasion and they should bear consequences for it. But it doesn't change the fact that Europe could have avoided the war. And this is an important lesson that unfortunately very few seem to learn from the war. We learned completely wrong lessons as far as I can tell, especially in Western Europe, maybe Hungary a little bit better. Europe needs to be able to uphold security in Europe, and Ukraine is our own backyard. It's a 100% European country. So Europe should have been able to control the situation in the last 10 or 15 years. We should have been able to give security guarantees to both Kiev and Moscow long time ago. But to give such guarantees, you also have to be first independent and strong. And Europe has not been. Ukraine has been for 2 decades, a theater for a conflict between Moscow and Washington. And this conflict, Europe should not have allowed to happen, or at least we should have stopped it, move on for so long. But unfortunately today, because of the war, we are not moving in the direction of European sovereignty, rather the opposite. And as far as I can tell, Hungary is the only EU country which really tries to formulate and gather member states around the sovereign European policy. But so far, the response is quite lackluster. And there is some interest from a few EU countries like Austria, Croatia, partly also the German establishment. Also, recently France has made attempts to find some kind of European solutions. But the only way Europe can really be sovereign, that is if Germany, which is the largest and most central country in the EU, they have to start standing up and acting more independently in foreign policy. That's the only real starting point to formulate and gather a true sovereign European security policy and foreign policy. I think you had an embryo of this in the Minsk agreements. that were supposed to freeze the conflict in Ukraine over previous years, but it was too little, and in the end it was also too late. And due to Russia's invasion, we are of course further from European security policy now than in a very long time. So to sum it up, I don't think it's realistic with a fully independent European energy policy within the near future. The best we can do is to move over to electricity as much as we can, while at the same time increasing our own energy production, electric production. So in other words, new electricity production, that is our ladder up from the pit. New nuclear reactors, more solar panels, and more battery packs. But to be truly independent in the longer term, we also need to have to start laying foundations for a common European security policy, and that work has to start right now. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen, Almqvist úr, értékes gondolat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Almqvist, for these very valuable thoughts. And I'd like to continue by saying that apparently the EU has lost its sovereignty, and I think this was well visible as regards the war. And this is one of the crises of the European Union, and the EU seems to be going from crisis to crisis. And meanwhile, the federalists and the sovereignists dilemma is increasing, and this became very clear during the migration crisis. As Mr. Csizmadia, President Csizmadia also said, there are certain suggestions for a probable solution, how to come out from this crisis, and one is what the President said, some sort of reformed structure, like, for example, the European Commission, which is now a top decision-making body, would be replaced by the European Council, so it would be subordinated to the European Council, and then we could get to a point that governments elected by European citizens would rule Europe. And this way, of course, the citizens could have a bigger say in the decision-making, and also probably a smaller Parliament, smaller in size, would serve better the purposes of the European Union and could mean a direct direct say for electors or voters into the affairs. But I think this is well underpinned by our slogan, that of CÖF, which is nothing about us without us. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Honorary President of VOCA Europe, who used to be the President of the Social Committee of the European Union. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for being here with us. The floor is yours.
Good evening to everybody. I would like, first of all, to thank very much Mr. Csizmadia for this invitation and congratulate him for what he's doing. I see behind you this beautiful event that he organizes each year in Budapest, which gathers 100,000 of Hungarian people, which shows how powerful is the civic movement, and the civic movement globally in Hungary. But I will just make some quick comments on this question of energy. First of all, concerning energy policy of the European Union, we have to admit, all of us, that the actual, I have to say, result of the action of Mrs. von der Leyen and predecessor, mainly her, is totally a disaster. It's a big failure, and I think it's important to be very vocal on that. If you see, so I'm speaking also from a French perspective, but I think from the other Europeans, if you see the reality, we see that the single market of energy, of electricity, is a failure. Because the fixed price linked to, they were supposed to support renewable energy by fixing high price linked to the last provider of energy. So we come to the price of gas. So then we have very high price for everybody, including for countries like France, who produce majority of electricity from nuclear source, which is totally absurd. And now the gas is going down, so now it's quite new failures and new difficulty for some other countries. So this system of a single energy market doesn't work. So it's a failure. It's also a failure when you see that the European Union was unable to build, we speak about sovereignty, but it's important to have strong actor, strongest producer of energy, strongest company. So the European Commission was just concerned by destroying the actual strong companies, for example, Electricité de France that we have in France. I think it was an obsession, probably driven by the Germans, I don't know, but an obsession of the Commission to dismantle one of the biggest European concern of energy, and I think it was the case in other countries. So this idea that you have to destroy, to dismantle the coherent and global world leader as European champions in energy, it's also a stupidity. And I don't speak that because it's EDF from far. I don't care about EDF, but I care about the fact that the European Union sometimes is driven by very strange interests. The third element is the dependence on external source. Of course, we were too dependent from the Russian gas and Russian fuel, but I think that was mainly the case from East Europe and from Germany, not from all countries. But now we have replaced that dependence to other sources. For example, we are now become very dependent from the US gas, schist gas. Is it clever? First of all, it's not very green. I think Greta Thunberg shouldn't applaud that, although we can't hear her saying anything on that. Plus we are, for example, being dependent of such democratic and nice country like Azerbaijan, with threatening our Christian brothers of Armenian every day with invasion, putting some region, giving no food. So we became from Russia dependence, we came to US, Azerbaijan, and other. So not very as dangerous, even more dangerous than Russia country. So I don't think it's very clever. So saying that, the question is, of course, what to do. What to do, as it was mentioned, I personally don't expect anything good coming from the actual commission, chaired by I will say the Davos Forum team. I don't think they will really are really in favor of European interest and of European sovereignty. I think the opposite. Of course, energy is very complex. The solution, there's probably not one solution. We all know that there is probably a mix between, it was said by my predecessors, I won't repeat, of course, starting by more energy efficiency, and we see that there is waste of energy at all steps in our life. That's of course starting by that, but also starting with renewable energy. We all know that also renewable energy, there is a limit. The limit is that renewable energy first is linked with very often with import from China product, plus it's linked with some natural resources which are limited. For example, take the example of the sun. We use a lot of sun for solar panel and for windmills and others, and there is a question of sun, for example, by the Chinese has made so much devastation in a lot of countries, Africa and Asia and so on, but we see the limit in 10, 15 years. So just to think that renewable energy will solve everything, it's a lie, and it's a mistake. Of course, we have nuclear energy. We all know the problem of nuclear energy, but there we can hope. But for example, the ITER project, the international ITER project, or some others, we find solution to develop a clean nuclear energy, cleaning meaning safe and clean for the waste. There are the hydrogen. Some people say it's a solution, some people no. But anyway, there is a mix. But when I come to the most, what I think the most important point, my short presentation, I promise. It's about the way the European Union is doing all the things, and where I just joined Mr. Csizmadia about the governance of the EU. The tendency of the last Commission, and mainly Ms. von der Leyen, is to concentrate all power in the hands of the Brussels technocrat, to decide everything, including the price of electricity, including the So how much we will continue to use fossil energy, and very well why Poland still use coal and that's totally understandable, because we have to organize all this transition with steps. Cannot be brutal. We have to consider each country's interest, nation interest, and I think that we really need in the energy sector, like in all sectors, a real change in the way the European Union is organized, as Mr. Csizmadia said, a reform, meaning to change the sovereignty, the decision should be made at the level of nations, at the level of the people, and not at the level of Brussels. Brussels should be there, as Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, father founder of the European Union, dreamed about. But unfortunately, I'm sure if they wake up now, they will be afraid when we see the reality how the European Union has changed from a decentralized, human-friendly, made on trying to create general interest and common interest, to some, I would say, a kind of centralized bureaucratic kind of dictatorship where everything is decided from Brussels. And for the energy sector as well, I think, okay, European Union should give the broad lines, the guidelines, but we should give each nation, each region even, to be able to develop its own mix of all the energy I mentioned. Because the one has more water than the other, one has more sun than the other, one has more wind, one has still some fossil energy, and so there is a social and an economic interest to continue to use them. Each region should be able to develop its own mix. And of course, concerning external source, as it was said, Russia is in Europe, so as soon as possible, it will become again a leader. We are also the main country, and we should not repeat the mistake we made with Russia to be too much dependent from one country. We should diversify and see all the possibility which exist. But I really think that the question of government is a key sector. So as long as we have a centralized, let me say, Davos Club driven European Commission, which has a monopoly on everything. I don't know if we have to dismantle the European Commission, but for sure, in my view, we have to reduce its power. It's not possible to have, for example, an executive with, in the same time, part of the legislative, because they have a monopoly of proposals. It's also part of a regulatory institution, because it has regulatory power, for example, in competition, to fight against energy companies. So you see, this is there is no any democratic experience in all the century in the world where such a body has so much power. So this will be the key to have a reasonable, decentralized, human-friendly European energy policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maus, for your presentation. And now, before we go to the questions and answers and the problems that are of the interest of all of us from the different countries, I would like to ask, first of all, President Csizmadia to react and respond to what we have heard on his behalf.
I think that we have received, we Hungarians, the majority of Hungary, what we expected. A very rich, colorful, informative online conference. And I think time is money. Perhaps this is the reason why I would like to express my heart thanks to you, and I would like to close my remark with one idea. Our European, the sovereignty of our European continent should be preserved by any cost. with economic, political, and social actions that primarily aim at creating peace. We are over 2 world wars, and I think it is high time that we could state that Europe is the continent of peace. We can become the grand ambassadors of peace. But naturally, we need independence, we need sovereignty, and sovereignty also means independence in the military field, in the national defense field, and in brackets, it's fantastic that we receive protection from the NATO, but still the NATO is quite remarkably influenced by the United States. And this also means that we should somehow strengthen our independence and sovereignty within the NATO as well. I think we should all stand up for a Europe which is strong again, which is independent again. Thank you very much, Mr. President, especially for your convincing words. And right now, we enter the second phase of our conference, where we speak about current issues in the European Union. Before that, I would like to ask Mr. Almqvist to react on what we have heard so far at the conference. Mr. Almqvist, the floor is yours.
Do you hear me? Yes, unmuted, yes.
Igen,
Okay.
halljuk.
I think it's by now that we all agree that the European and the EU energy policy has been a disaster. But I would also like to add that if you zoom out a little bit, it almost seems like sabotage to me, because for 10 years we've been sanctioning Russia, which we are totally rely on for energy imports. And at the same time, we've been dismantling our nuclear power plants all over Central. And it just doesn't make sense. It's a recipe for disaster and to lose independence and strength, also position. And I mean, it goes so far. I can take some examples from my own home country, Sweden. In Sweden, not only have we closed down our nuclear reactors one by one, we also have actively destroyed the reactors. They put some kind of acids in them so that to make sure that they can never be reopened again. I mean, I cannot see how this is anything but sabotage, and it's so obvious. And now in Sweden, for the first time in decades, Sweden now has reopened instead oil power plants to burn oil to create electricity, which Sweden didn't have to do for decades because it had a powerful, sustainable system based on hydropower and nuclear power. And this is the same situation as in Germany, where coal is being, reintroduced and more and more coal is being burnt. And many people like to say that it's easy to be wise in hindsight, but I think in this case, you don't have to be wise in hindsight. This was obvious all along from the very beginning. This was very simple mathematics where we are heading to. And again, I think this also points out how central Germany's role is, both in the current situation, but also in a potential solution, because not only has Germany has been actually the worst example when it comes to energy policy. They have been closing down the nuclear powers more than reactors more than anybody else, while they have also been one of the most dependent countries on Russian oil, and at the same time sanctioning Russia and doing everything to have a worse relationship to Russia. So Germany is like that's the worst example in the book, and since they are the biggest country in the EU, that also has a pretty heavy weight for Europe. And since they are centrally located, we also other countries around also face the consequences, since all their systems are now interconnected with gas and electricity and so on. So it all started with Germany, and it also has to start with Germany again. If Europe will have a unified, strong, efficient and sovereign energy policy, it has to start with Germany. And as I said before in my speech, it also has to go hand in hand with a sovereign security and foreign policy. And again, Germany has to take the main role in that. If Germany would raise up and be a little bit more independent, I think you can already see from Paris and Rome that other major EU countries, they are security policy in Europe. It's just everybody is waiting for is Germany. Thank you.
Almqvist úr, köszönjük, és ha megengedi, még nem eresztjük.
Almqvist, thank you very much. But if you allow us, I would like to ask two questions from you. There are two questions that the Hungarian population is very much interested in. We know that migration has been posing enormous problems, challenges to Sweden. The ever-increasing number of migrants takes a heavy toll. And right now we have heard something from the Swedish Prime Minister, which is quite unprecedented. He said that crime will not stop by itself. These people should be locked up, and those who are not Swedish citizens must be expelled from the country. So here we see a grand change in the stance of the Prime Minister. So what is the reason behind this change in attitude? Previously, we were not used to hearing such strong words from a Swedish politician. What is the reason?
The reason why we hear these rhetorics and narratives nowadays from Sweden is basically that reality is starting to catch up with even the politicians in Sweden can't hide from reality anymore. In the last few years, according to official EU statistics, Sweden had the highest number of gun murders in the European Union year after year. We're talking not only handguns, we're talking machine guns, hand grenades, things that you would expect either in a war zone or perhaps among the drug cartels in Mexico, but not in a civilized European country, especially not the Northern European country, which still has a reputation for being such a well-functioning society. So this is the reality, and these murders and bombings as well. There's plenty of bombings happening constantly in Sweden. They started to come so close to the political elite that you couldn't really hide from the issues anymore. So, and at the same time, my own party, which I also used to represent in the parliament in Sweden, we were growing on being the only one addressing these issues. So this is the background story. However, what we can expect is a little bit harder to say, because to start with, I think the prime minister, who belongs to the liberal conservative party of Sweden, he's honest, and he has a very clear political line in these matters. But I'm not 100% sure with that said, because he used to be the head of his party's youth organization a couple of decades ago, and he was very much advocating for totally free borders, no immigration control whatsoever, and that was one of his darling issues. So is it trustworthy that it totally turn around? Maybe. Let's see. We will see. But then we have the second problem, and that is that the government coalition in Sweden also relies on the left liberal party, because otherwise they wouldn't have achieved majority. And so far, it also hasn't. We haven't seen any real change when it comes to migration policy in Sweden now after half a year with this government. It remains to be seen how much can be. I'm sure there will be some change for the better, but how far they can go, I don't know. It depends very much on how much you can pull the left liberal party with you. And the problem is also that since migration keeps, now it's still in the same pace as before. This is basically a population change that's happening in Sweden, a population exchange. And what it means is that in every new election, you have hundreds of thousands of new citizens voting, and a very vast majority of these new voters, they vote left-wing. So for every election, it's just getting harder and harder for a moderate right-wing government to gain majority. So it does look better in Sweden now politically than for a long time, but demographically it's just looking worse every day, and ultimately demography also rules over democracy. So this is the hard truth.
Almqvist úrnak köszönjük szépen a választ, és köszönjük szépen a részvételt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Almqvist, for your answer, and thank you very much for your very informative presentation. So you can say goodbye, or you can stay with us if you wish. And right now I'm turning to Mr. Litkai. Would you please briefly react on what we have heard so far at the conference, and then you will receive your specific questions as well.
And very valuable thoughts came from the participants, and I couldn't agree more with the ideas about nuclear energy and the liquefied natural gas that we purchase right now from the US and from Qatar and from other countries. So first of all, the nuclear energy is pure and clean in the sense that it not emits greenhouse gases, and if we want to reach our climate goals, we have to use more nuclear energy. It's clear, and every professional international organizations who are working on the field of energy can agree with this statement. So we need nuclear energy, and we should not waste an opportunity what a crisis can offer for us. This energy crisis opened some eyes in the EU. So clearly we can see a renaissance of nuclear energy who have right now nuclear energy in the energy mix, try to keep it. And some of the countries like Poland, for example, or France or Hungary will build new nuclear capacities. It's a good news, and actually it was caused by the energy crisis. And with this, we can reach our climate goals, and at the same time, we can build energy sovereignty in our own countries. And about LNG, just a short note. It's very funny that the European Commission tried to picture itself like they are the leader of climate neutrality and climate protection, and at the same time, during the energy crisis, they try to buy more and more LNG amounts from the US. It's much more polluting. It's much more expensive. Actually, it was 2 and 3 times more expensive before the energy crisis. And of course, because of the crisis, the prices on the market heavily increased, and the LNG is comparing to other sources. It's not so expensive right now, but if we can close this crisis, if we can put an end
Litkai úr, bocsásson meg, nem akarom megszakítani, csak nagyon röpül.
For interrupting you, but would you please just be brief?
On this crisis, the LNG will be very expensive again, and we just lose our competitiveness comparing to other economic regions.
Köszönjük, és a kérdés, amit ön kap, Litkai úr, az egy olyan kérdés, ami most
The question directed to you, Mr. Litkai, which is the battery struggle. Right now, battery factories, plants are being built, constructed in Hungary, and right now there is a very fierce political debate about these new or already existing plants. But at the same time, we can see that there is a competition in the world. More and more countries would like to invite these types of investments. On the one hand, we are expected to decrease our ecological footprint, so we should not open these plants. But on the other hand, there are other expectations related to employment rates. More and more people should get jobs, and these plants would employ thousands of workers. What is your opinion?
That we should reconcile very different aspects at the same time, and actually the battery industry is, of course, it has its ecological and carbon footprint. So every economic activity has its own footprint. But why we should use more battery according to the European Union? Because we need new and more storing capacities in the energy sector and in the transportation as well, because the transportation is a very big emitter as well, just as like the energy sector. And through the electric vehicles, for example, we can reduce the emission of the sector. But we need these factories to operate within the borders of the EU, because these are very heavy equipments, and it's just not profitable to transfer it from China, for example, who is the biggest producer of batteries right now. 77% of the batteries are produced by China. They are the biggest in this sector, and actually in most of the green, so-called green technologies like semiconductors or solar panels or wind turbines, they are the biggest. So we need connectivity with these big producers, and we have to invite them to the European Union and build connectivity with different investors and different producers. I see this situation more complex than it is pictured by the European Commission. We should not decouple ourselves totally from Russia, and we should not decouple ourselves totally from China. So we need batteries, we need the factories to build the batteries, and actually we need cooperation with the biggest producers. And with this, of course, the factories will pollute a small amount in this region, but what we can save in emission and what we can save in pollution through the transportation sector, it's much more. So the balance at the end is much nicer, I think. So it's not black or white. Thank you very much.
Köszönjük szépen, Litka úr, önöknek is a részvételt és a válaszokat, most pedig
Mr. Litkai, for your presentation, and thank you very much for your reaction. Mr. Malosse, Monsieur Malosse, I have only one question addressed to you, and this is a very hot topic right now in Paris, demonstrations against the pension reform. President Macron issued a decree without the involvement of the parliament. He himself signed the law, and we can see the result. We see demonstrations throughout France. What is your opinion about the present situation?
Yes. Oh, I was not prepared to that question, but I'm prepared to answer. So you know, we have a problem with the personality of a president, in my view, if I can say humbly and with all the respect. This is a person who is rather young, not very mature, with not so much experience, and not any political experience. And I think, in contrary to his predecessor, and mainly the predecessor we had in the past, General de Gaulle, Giscard d'Estaing, even François Mitterrand, he doesn't feel the necessity of understanding what the people need. Yes, it's true, he was elected, he was re-elected, but he was re-elected mainly because people didn't want to vote for Marine Le Pen and vote for him, but he was not elected, it was not a support to him. It was his support is around 25% of the country, so it's very low. But he's continued to think that his idea, his plans, economical plan was probably pushed by Brussels, Davos Club, and bankers, and insurance, and so on, are the good ones for the people. So he presented this reform very badly. He didn't make any real social dialogue. He, as you say, marginalized all the trade unions, even the most moderate. You know, in France we have particular system, but we have at least eight trade unions. Among them, some are, say, right-wing or moderate or Christ Democrats, very moderate. They were ready to negotiate something with Mr. Macron, but he didn't want to really enter in negotiation with them. And I think now we have this situation with code blockage. It's not really true when you say he enforced the law. No, he used all the elements of the actual French constitution. So everything what he did is legal, but unfortunately, it looks like there were no real vote in the parliament. Unfortunately, the support of some people from the Republican, the conservative party, just to keep their position, to get their seat as member of parliament, accept to support him. And now we face, I think, something between 70% of the population which is strongly against him. I don't think that it's just the pension reform which is in play. It's not just, it's the way, and I come back to what we discussed about Brussels. It's the way the country is ruled. I think we can't have someone who has a kind of technocratic approach, who doesn't listen, who doesn't try to find compromise, and would just go because he thinks that he's more intelligent. He thinks that he's more intelligent than the population, and he wants to impose his view. We have still 4 years to go with Mr. Macron, and as a lot of my compatriots, we are very concerned what will happen in the next month or year, because we don't see a solution with that kind of person who doesn't listen, with very, I will say, very arrogant, very ego-concentrate, and has no respect for the, what do you say, economic and social actors, no respect for civil society organization. It's a kind of technocratic way, and I'm afraid we'll go to a very difficult moment. And I think it's like Brussels. I will really compare that to the situation with the European Commission, von der Leyen, and the others. I think the gap between Macron and the French society, the gap between people in the Brussels Commission, in the European Commission, and the citizens is going deeper and deeper, and this is very dangerous. And I really hope that he will, at a certain stage, become more mature, more reasonable, and start to really open discussion, not just question about pension, but I think it's governance. In 2023, this vertical governance driven from the centralized, driven from the top, when there is a possibility in our constitution to have referendum, to have all kind of constitution, to have, I think, Jacques Chirac would never, for example, to speak about some recent president, we never have go on such a confrontation matter. And I think this is unfortunately, we finish by that. This is unfortunately the way some class of very arrogant technocrats, very close to multinationals, very close to, I would say, the Amazon, Google's, and Facebook, and other multinationals are behaving, and I think it's on the detriment, on the disadvantage of Europe.
Malosse úr, köszönjük, és végig.
Mr. Malosse, thank you very much. And now, finally, please very briefly also respond or react on the conference, and also, please, at the same time, the closing remarks of the conference go to you.
To be very brief, I think that all the speakers mentioned the failure of European policy concerning energy. The failure is due probably by the lack of consultation of the national government, the lack of consultation of civil society, the lack of confidence toward the citizens. So we really need energy policy or other topics, social policy, the question that you mentioned. We really need to think that the, as we say, pragmatic, realistic, moderate civil society organization, not ideological, sorry, but really approach to the human, to the Christian values. We have to bring again the Christian values in the European Union, the values of dialogue, the values of respect, and the values of subsidiarity. That means leave to the nations, leave to the territories, leave to the civil society organization, to the social partners, leave them the responsibility in a lot of fields, like energy, like social dimension, and a lot of others. Just give the big framework, make as the founder fathers of the European Union, who were Christ Democrats, like Konrad Adenauer, Paul-Henri Spaak, Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, and so many others. Let them give the big guidelines, the great guidelines, to protect European interests, to protect European sovereignty toward the third country, including the US. We should not become, as we are today, the kind of, I would say, with employees of Washington. We have to fight for our own interests. And in the same time, concerning concrete decision, pragmatic action, let the nation, let the territory, let civil society, economic, social actors do the job and decide in the framework of these guidelines, decide concretely way to organize the thing to closest to the citizens. Thank you very much. Köszönöm.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much also for providing a framework to the conference with these closing remarks. God bless you, and hopefully we can also welcome you at our conference next time as well. All the best, Mr. Malosse. And on behalf of President Csizmadia, I would also like to thank you very much for your very kind attention. Those who in the last 1.5 hours were together with us. We really believe and we are convinced that very precious thoughts have been disseminated to all, and we are hopeful that quite soon we can host you again, either physically or virtually online. Please spread our good news, both for the CÖF, the Forum of Civilian Joining Forces, and the CET as well. Thank you very much for thinking together. See you next time. Viszontlátásra.
A szeretet fénye benned él, ne feledd, mit anyád mesélt. Gyermekeidnek segít a szél, apád szavát merre vigyék.
Lesznek új esték, hétköznapi csodák.
Fiat, lányod, ha ébred, álmod viszi tovább.
Sok száz győzelem, 1000 év mögöttünk. Festettek új képeket, még meg sem születtünk. A nap felkel reggel,
És ha érezzük, szédülünk,
marad 3 szó, semmit rólunk féltünk.
Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, összetartozunk. Akárhová vetett a sors, egy vérből vagyunk.
Ne félj, soha se félj,
te mindenre figyelj.
akárhová lépsz.
Együtt leszünk, ha kell. tudjuk, mi volt tegnap, mi látjuk a